Good morning, all. In the earlier lecture, we had discussed about the fiscal prudence. At the same time, there are issues in the previous couple of lectures. We had made a point that public um, spending largely reduces out of private spending, which is theoretically people argue for it. Like they used to say that if the fiscal deficit or the spending of the public sector has goes up, then or it is increases, then it is definitely having to reduces the total fund which is available for the private investors reduces, and therefore there is a possibility of crowd out. So this is what is actually the standard argument normally people were been discussing. But there are different economists, in fact, had different versions on and different views on this aspect, and most of the empirical studies not very much validate this aspect. However, as a discussion point, the same is always been been part of the syllabus of different institutions. So I would like to basically reflect upon this thing. So in 2015 there is a study which was conducted by IMF regarding this matter on examining the Indian data set. So Girish Bahal, Mehdi Raisi and Vladimir Tunil, they were in fact on behalf of the International Monetary Fund had done a working paper. So basically this paper is published in 2015. In that paper they are extensively used to this analysis by using structural vector model and co-integration model and all. So I am going to basically discuss their paper and their finding from the Indian statistics. There are other studies also conducted in India, for example in the IMF WP studies, National Institute of Public Finance and policy. They were also conducted studies about the crowding out crowding in aspect of the theory, and found out that there is no basis. So as an analytical point, as a the authority in this aspect, the IMF working paper, I thought to discuss with all of you, and especially the relation between public capital accumulation and private investment has received varied and renewed interest these days. So especially in the policymakers, like in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. So this is where the earlier before the financial crisis, people were not very much interested in, because they believed that market can largely take place, but there are different aspect of or position regarding this, and people have a varied opinion in this regard. So on the other hand, higher public investment may crowd out private expenditure on capital goods irrespective of the financial mechanism, including through levying taxes or issuing debt, etc. So on the other hand, higher government spending on infrastructure facilities like road, highway and power and health and other education may have a complementary impact on private sector investment by raising the marginal productivity of the private capital. These were the issues people have been raising, and the literature which mostly relies on time, time series as well as the cross-sectional analysis. Especially cross-country regression analysis, and in my view most of the studies not come up with very good results, but this paper is very interesting for me because this comes with some meaningful discussion. So let us discuss the paper, and in this paper the authors try to examine the relationship between Indian estimating a structural vector correction model, that is CM model, and in three variable, especially what they were looked at is the public investment, private investment and output relation over the period of 1950 to 2012, and then again they have also a bifurcated data of 1980s to 2000, the same period 2012. So and see that whether there is a change. That is, we also they also investigated whether the relation has changed over time after the policy reform started in the 80s, as well as the post-liberalization in early 1990s, and they have also quarterly analysis of this period, that is Q1, Q2, and Q1 of 2015. Okay, so then they also use the for the analysis the CMI data, so which is available data, of course a private data set, but fairly okay with it. And then their contribution to the literature on public-private investment relation, emerging market economies, identification strategy, and the use of the theory-driven long-run relation in the analysis. So this is what is actually they were looked at. And they also try to identify problems by imposing restrictions on the long-run impact of the shocks. Especially motivated those restrictions from the economic theory perspective, namely the great ratio of investment to output, and then this decomposed structural shocks into those with permanent and transitory effect on the level of variables for the identifications. So they found out that while public capital accumulation crowds out private investment in India over the full sample of 2050, 60, 12, 50 to 2012, the opposite is the case with the 1980 to the recent period. So this is, as I said, it is very interesting for me. So I wish to discuss this kind of an estimation. So there are other studies also in this regard. There are studies of Volcom. We have discussed their contribution in previous lectures and all. So Mitra and many people were trying to talk about all this. The findings of this paper in general, normally in agreement with Mitra and Servan's paper, and their earlier studies are their data encompasses annual observations of all that. Okay, so I'm not going to the details of all that. If you want to basically look at the paper, please to feel free to look at the paper, which is very interesting. So let me go to the data set and finding of what they have done. So their basically their specification involves annual Indian data on GDP, public and private sector gross fixed capital formation for the period of 50 to 2012. The data is from National Account Statistics as published by Indian Central Statistical Office. All the variables are measured in real per capita terms, and the quarterly frequency data of the CAPEX database of the CMI, which has been monitoring India's investment activity since its creation of 1974. So this is a fairly standard data from a private database point of view, and the project that entails capital expenditure of 10 million rupee or more beginning from 1996 and comprising about 45,000 projects. So as there is no one source for private investment project information, the CAPEX data is compiled from all available credible sources. However, this data should not be seen as comprehensive or perfect in the coverage. So they acknowledge all this fact. Despite all these things, their analysis is finds a little bit interesting. So the section basically discusses the result of the models with the annual frequency as well as quarterly investment data. So the baseline specification contains annual data, which is normally with their notation that YT, YIT and PIT over a period of 52 2012, largely 63 observations, and they treated this specification as the baseline to enable comparison with earlier studies like Mitra and Servan, Mitra 2006 and Servan 1999, which also used annual data on roughly comparable samples. We also check whether the private investment responds differently to accumulate the public infrastructure capital like electricity, railway and other aspects. These are not very interesting for me. And what is actually the models are finding, that is this is the following. Like in the paper they have a post-liberalization analysis as well as the pre-liberalization In that, what is actually the rough finding is the following. That is, in 2000, this two classification, there is a clear crowd out of investment, but still I have a, I mean, of course you have your own mechanism, but in the 50 to 2012 there is a possibility of a crowd out. This is largely because of the influence of the earlier period of 1950 to 1980 period, where till 1980 period, where the private investment is in fact have a limited capital as well as an investment mechanism, where almost all the projects were being basically initiated by the public investment, because in the beginning the Indian capitalists had not much resources. Right? That is also a fact. Right? When you talk about the historical entitlement kind of thing, it is very difficult at the point of the Indian independence. The private capital was able to basically mobilize funds which is sufficient for doing any business. That is why the center, the government of India become or acted as a center for investing, especially in the larger projects like this the hydroelectric projects or the steel projects, etc. Though, however, a few private players were there. Even they were in support of the government starting basic infrastructure and all, because they want to basically develop this infrastructure, which is a long-term investment required infrastructure, which was not being able to fund by them, and given the very weaker position of the financial condition of the Indian state, the risk was too high at that point for the Indian capitalists, therefore, or the investors largely. And that is why there is a possibility that their finding is corroborates, so that's it is in connection tune with that they are not able to actually spend too much of money in that. That's what the center, the public investment was played a very crucial, which is very good to have a narrative of this thing, that over the period it was crowded. But when they have a bifurcation over the data set in the post liberalization instance, and they found out that there is a crowding in of private investment, this is because actually the public spending again had actually boosted the private investment, at least over this period, because you have a better road facilities, you have a public health access, and hospital facilities has improved, and these are all actually created a niche for the private investors to come and not actually go out, because now over a period the private Indian capital or the investors become a little bit confident about Indian economy, and then the post liberalization period, largely that 30 at least 25 years of investment history, if you look into, so not 25, 35 years of investment history, this investment of the public sector in fact moved, and they were positively understood this fact, and which was being discussed. So the idea of basically crowding out in a positively functioning economy and relatively better performing economy is in fact a sham, and I feel that we have to re-narrate a whole story of what is this crowding in and out, especially a country is in progress vis-a-vis a country is already in saturated position, where your private capital is having an ability to basically invest much, whereas this public sector intervention in a full employed situation naturally logically crowds out the case. Whereas if you have a country which is actually underutilized resources or underemployed resources are in place, then naturally this is going to have a crowding in, because there is always a possibility of a private sector to make profit. At the same time, the government is having its own mentality to have, or its own strategy of basically providing resources. This is in fact gives more opportunity, as far as the logic of this sort of an investment is concerned, to the private party incentive rather than disincentive. So I feel that this finding is pretty interesting, and there are are other works also done by many economists. They also corroborate, they are also try to say that the crowding in is naturally in the developing economy's context, or at least an emerging economy's perspective. Crowding in is naturally take place rather than crowding out. So on the contrary, logically it is also possible to say that when you have a full employment, naturally your logic will persist, but nobody knows about the full employment situation or the extreme situation of the employability of resources. But so long as if you have a space of growth which imply that there is a possibility of utilization of resources, and underutilization of resources is in place. So if that is the case, then naturally you have a possibility of in fact increase the tendency of crowding in rather than crowding out. So I feel that this is an pretty nice way of looking into the problem, and I suggest you to read this paper. And of course, sometimes it is also political, but with this short lecture, I feel that this is very, very interesting to understand the very nitty-gritties of crowding in an empirical context. I feel that the crowding in is in fact more logical in the context, especially when your economy is emerging. So with this, let me conclude. Thank you very much.